So the interview with you is one of the most important components or steps in the recruitment process. Already the candidate's been through a phone interview, a Zoom interview, they've likely done psychometric assessments as well. So this is absolutely pivotal in terms of meeting with them face to face, not only giving you the opportunity to meet with them and find out more, but also for them really generating that motivation and interest in you, in the wider team and in the company as well. Really paying attention to some of the smaller details during your interview, even as small as asking them if they want a glass of water, can be extremely important. Really making sure that they're comfortable in the environment. This will be key in them determining whether they want to work with you or not. It'll give them a really key impression around the company, yourself, the wider team, especially when we're concerned with attracting that one high performer that can really, potentially change your business. These little things can really do a lot of good in terms of attracting them and really motivating them to join the company. Another critical component in the interview with a candidate is really giving them a clear and accurate picture of what they're going to be doing day to day in the role and what some of their really key responsibilities are. It can be quite easy, especially at a later stage where you're quite excited about a candidate, in the view of actually filling the role relatively quickly. Really wanting to give that coherent picture of what they're actually going to be doing day to day in the position is going to be absolutely critical. Any inconsistency can potentially be interpreted negatively by the candidate and could potentially jeopardise their interest in the role. Now, what are you going to talk about in your interview? Really the key thing, and there's no real rigid structure here, but I guess to start off with, providing the candidate with a really clear agenda and outlining what the expectation and what the topics are that are going to be discussed in the interview itself is a really great way to start off the interview, and even asking how much time that they have. If you've booked an hour, just reconfirming that you've got that hour left, can again show that you respect their time really strongly. Now, in terms of the actual content of the interview itself, starting off with some of the more easier things for a candidate to talk through, for example, their career history, can be a really great way to start off with the interview and make the candidate feel really comfortable as well. From there, delving into maybe some more detail-orientated behavioural questions, which your consultant at Inject can also give some insight and provide to potentially probe some areas that perhaps have come through in the testing and other interviews to further explore. So delving into those can also be really important in this stage. So another really important component of your interview with a candidate is giving them that first person account of the wider working environment as well as the wider team that they could potentially be working with. If they're working in a warehouse, take them through the warehouse, or take them through the office. Take them into the workshop. Can be really impactful and again can get that really strong buy-in for the candidate. There is one thing though that I'll touch on later on something maybe to avoid when introducing the candidate to the wider team. Really encouraging questions can be, again, absolutely critical in the interview stage as well. And bear in mind the word encourage. It's really important that you foster a really high level of comfort from the candidate to really ask any questions, whether they be a bit awkward or whether they are wanting some really in-depth information. Encouraging that explicitly in the interview can again be something that provides really great value to the candidate during the interview. Often a lot of the feedback that we get from candidates around their interviews with clients is really hearing about the positive passion that a hiring manager or an owner of a company has about their business and the direction that they're taking their business. So definitely do encourage to really share what are some of the future plans, what are you really hoping to achieve, and really communicating how this candidate falls into the future plans within the company, all while obviously giving them an accurate picture of the role and the responsibilities of the position as well. So what I want to do now is go through a few points. Now, some of these you may not do, though some you may do without you knowing. And I'd love to go through now and some of the ways that these can come through in your interview with a candidate. Now, it can be quite easy when meeting with a candidate who is potentially going to be the one that does join your company and be the new member of your team. It's quite easy to fall into the trap of becoming overly excited around all the different possibilities with that particular person. They could be going for an administration role, and there could be, a future possibility of this person moving into a managerial role or a team leader role, a role where they're going to be managing and supervising other people. Now, you could be talking about the possibility of this without actually knowing whether this is something that that particular candidate even wants to be doing. And by focusing in and talking about these possibilities rather than the actual job that they've applied for, could potentially lose that particular candidate and could cause them, losing interest in the job itself. The behaviour shown throughout an interview is really going to be put under a magnifying glass by that particular candidate. And by talking about particular statements like the interest in or disinterest in a particular politician, for example, can really make the candidate sit back and think whether this is the right cultural fit or the right workplace for them. One of the points I wanted to touch on, which I mentioned before, is a measure of success shouldn't necessarily be how well this candidate clicked with the wider team. Really, first impressions aren't really a reliable indicator of how well someone will perform in the role. There have been many times where the wider team's first impression of a candidate hasn't been absolutely spectacular. But really, that's not a valid measure of someone's ability to perform the role. And many times before, there have been candidates that have slowly built up that relationship with the wider team once they've gotten the role itself and performed very well. We often recommend not talking about salary in the interview itself. This is because base salary can be very closely aligned to someone's self-worth, and in a relatively stressful situation at times, like a client interview, it's often not the right mindset or situation for that particular person to negotiate or disagree with, mentions of base salary. When it comes to commission schemes, often these can be quite complex and hard to understand. And in all likelihood, you're probably the best person to discuss this in the interview itself. So that's something that we would recommend, progressing with and talking with in the interview. Now, in the interview itself, it can be really important to really build that rapport, ask questions about themselves and, really establish and attempt to build that relationship. Though it's important to be mindful that certain questions can at times be interpreted the wrong way, and at times, worst case scenario can even leave you open to claims of discrimination. Even questions around a candidate's last name, asking them where they're from or what their current living situation is. These are all particular questions that at times can be completely harmless and well-intentioned, but depending on the particular candidate, can be interpreted negatively at times. And it can be quite easy for a hiring manager to fall in the trap of giving a false impression of the role. And this false impression could possibly come from previous employees who have been in the role and have left, let's say, for doing some small portion of the position. And because they've left because of, say, filing paperwork, hiring managers can tend to overrepresent that to future prospective candidates, when in reality it's only really a small portion of the role. So in this video, we've covered the overall goal of a candidate interview, as well as understanding some of the do's and possible do-nots in these kind of interviews. If you have any further questions, please do reach out to your Inject consultant.